Greetings once again to everyone who is listening to this video. So for today, I'm going to discuss more on purposive communication, specifically on Chapter 3, Local and Global Communication in Multicultural Settings. So our first lesson for this chapter is entitled Intercultural Communication. So, what do we say about intercultural communication? Humans are formed by forces other than genetics. We have the family background, religious affiliations, sociocultural forces, economic conditions, and other factors that shape human identities. So because of this, no two people can ever be exactly the same. So we're going to talk about how languages differ across the different cultures of people. So we are going to talk about communicating across cultures. Okay, so we have subtopics for this one. First one is communicating across cultures is challenging. So each culture has set rules that its members take for granted. Few of us are aware of our own cultural biases because cultural imprinting is begun at a very early age, at the very comforts of our home. So while some know cultures, beliefs of a certain group, okay, others have different. Okay? And most of the information is absorbed subconsciously because it began from the day that the individual was born. Next one, number 2, the challenge for multinational communication has never been greater. So, the ones that we're going to discuss here would be worldwide business organizations. So, with intercultural communication, this one is leveling up, okay? Not just because of increased globalization, but also because their domestic workforce is growing more and more diverse. So, how is it diverse? It's because of culture and ethnics. Okay, now we have number 3. We are all individuals and no two people belonging to the same culture are guaranteed to respond in exactly the same way. So, the generalizations are valid to the extent that they provide clues on what you will most likely encounter when dealing with members of a particular culture. So, there might be beliefs or traditions which are the same with the others, but of course, there will always be differences. Alright, so we have the next aspect for this communicating across cultures. We have the high context versus low context, in which will be discussed to these different subtopics. We have number 4. All international communication is influenced by cultural differences. So, even the choice of communication medium can have cultural overtones. So, the determining factor may not be the degree of industrialization, but rather when the country falls into a high context or low context culture. So, what do you mean by high context? Let's have number 5. High context cultures, we have the Mediterranean, Slav, Central European, Latin American, African, Arab, Asian, American, Indian leave much of the message unspecified to be understood through context, nonverbal cues, and between the lines interpretation of what is actually said. By contrast, low context cultures, most Germanic and English speaking countries expect messages to be explicit and specific. So, this is the time that we're going to look into the denotation and connotation of what the speaker is saying. So for high context cultures, there's like within their messages there are always implied meanings, so there are implications. Meanwhile, low context cultures just have this direct messages, and it means literally as what they want to be interpreted. Okay, aside from that, we also have what we call sequential versus synchronic. Okay, and will be discussed to this different subtopics again, which is number 6. Some cultures think of time sequentially as a linear commodity to spend, save, or waste. So what do you mean by that? Here we mean to say that other cultures view time synchronically as a constant flow to be experienced in the moment, and as a force that cannot be contained or controlled. Okay, but of course, it's the other way around. For sequential, what do you mean by sequential cultures? In sequential cultures like North American, English, German, Swedish, and Dutch, business people give full attention to one agenda item after another. So, right after one topic, then proceed to another topic. That's sequential culture. And to further elaborate synchronic culture, in synchronic cultures, including South America, Southern Europe, and Asia, the flow of time is viewed as a sort of circle with the past, present, and future all interrelated. So there's a simultaneous discussion of this one. So this viewpoint influences how organizations in those cultures approach deadlines, strategic thinking, developing talent from within, and the concept of long-term planning. Okay, and then next is number 9. Orientation to the past, present, and future is another aspect of time in which cultures differ. So, westernized countries, Americans believe that the individual can influence the future by personal effort, but since there are too many variables in the distant future, we favor a short-term view. Synchronistic cultures' context is to understand the present and prepare for the future. Any important relationship is a durable bond that goes back and forward in time, and it is often viewed as grossly disloyal not to favor friends and relatives in business dealings. Okay, so that's what we mean by this sequential cultures and then synchronic cultures. Now, next to that one is the difference between effective and neutral. So let's have the first subtopic under this one. In international business practices, reason and emotion both play a role. Okay, so which of these domains depends upon whether we are effective, okay, or emotionally neutral in our approach. Members of neutral cultures do not telegraph their feelings but keep them carefully uncontrolled and subdued. So they cannot really express their feelings. In cultures with high affective value, people show their feelings plainly by laughing, smiling, and sometimes crying, shouting, or walking out of the room. So it means that they are somewhat really showy to what they are feeling at that moment. And then the next one, number 11, this doesn't mean that people in neutral cultures are cold or unfeeling. Of course, we all have our feelings. Just that for neutral, they can't really express because there are those people who cannot really do that. But in the course of normal business activities, neutral cultures are more careful to monitor the amount of emotion they display. So it means that they could control, unlike in those affective cultures who really are just straightforward when it comes to expressing their emotions. Emotional reactions were found to be least acceptable in Japan, Indonesia, the UK, Norway, and the Netherlands, and most accepted in Italy, France, the US, and Singapore. So you might want to take note of the countries I've mentioned, because that they don't care about your feelings, but these countries I've mentioned are categorized whether they are effective or neutral when it comes to communication. Next one is reason and emotion are part of all human communication. So when we express ourselves, we look to others for confirmation of our ideas and feelings. If our approach is highly emotional, we are seeking a direct emotional response, like I feel the same way, like that. If our approach is highly neutral, we want an indirect response. Okay, and that indirect response could be, I agree with your thoughts on this. So it's like they are objective. Okay, so that one. Okay, number 13, it's easy for people from neutral cultures to sympathize with the Dutch manager and his frustration over trying to reason with that excitable Italian. An idea either works or it doesn't work. And the way to test the validity of an idea is through trial and observation. That just makes sense, right? Not necessarily to the Italian who felt the issue was deeply personal and who viewed any rational argument as totally irrelevant. So it really depends upon the culture. Even if you think that the one you just said is valid, but for them in their culture it's not, then they're not going to accept that. So we need to be mindful with the cultures of different people. Next one, number 14, when it comes to communication, what's proper and correct in one culture may be ineffective or even offensive in another. Yes, that is really true. In reality, no culture is right or wrong, better or worse. You're just different. This might be acceptable to me, but to you, it's not. So as simple as that. So in today's global business community, there is no single best approach to communicating with one another. Yes, so we cannot say that this approach is the best for this one. Okay, it's just that we have different bests. Okay, when it comes to communicating across our culture. So the key to cross-cultural success is to develop an understanding of and a deep respect for the differences, or even learning on the culture itself, so you might be aware what are those really acceptable or not, specifically to the language that they use. Okay, so that's for intercultural communication. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope that you were able to gain some, as I will be having the next lineup of videos for this chapter under purposive communication. Goodbye and have a nice day ahead.